Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is Sleepy Time Tea from Celestial Seasonings, a nice relaxing blend of herbs that I have had for many years. It's a classic. And I thought it would be a nice accompaniment to a little bit of a chat tea time, which I haven't done, I think, in a while. It's a little bit of a ramble as well, because I'm not forming all my thoughts completely in an organized fashion. But I thought I would talk about probably my favorite Victorian writer. The problem is that I don't enjoy calling things favorites because I always feel like that is so limiting. Just like I've said millions of times, I don't like saying this is my favorite color, period, because it may be my favorite color, but it may not be my favorite flower color or wall color, etc. It's just, it limits one so much. And yet, if you were to ask me who is my favorite novelist of all time, I'd probably say, without hesitation, Jane Austen. And that's kind of a well-known fact about me, so it's not like I can't say favorites. But when someone asks me, who is your favorite Victorian novelist? I can have a list of my favorites, but I think that who comes to mind first, especially in the past, I don't know, however many years I've read him, um, close to 15 years, but not quite, I guess. That would be Anthony Trollope. And I mean, in terms of the ratio of books per, author's written works, it wouldn't seem that way because I think I've read more of the Bronte's works. I've read more of Dickens' works, especially compared to what he wrote. And probably even George Eliot. Maybe not Thomas Hardy. But anyway, so it may not make sense. And also because I guess I've read close to 10 of his books, and he wrote, I believe, 47 books. I could be wrong on that number, but I'm pretty close. So you might say, well, how is this possible? How could you call him your favorite? It just, that is the, I wouldn't even say knee-jerk reaction. It's just the thought that pops into my head that Anthony Trollope is my favorite. And I'm not exactly sure why, but I'm going to say that. I'm going to continue to say that he is my favorite Victorian novelist. And that doesn't discount any of the other Victorian novelists. I really love Gaskell. I love Dickens. I love all the Brontes, well, mostly. And there's a list of others. I mean, let's not even talk about Arthur Conan Doyle, but that's mostly the Sherlock Holmes stories. Nevertheless, and I feel a little bit defensive of Anthony Trollope because I don't think he gets quite the love that a lot of other writers get. That doesn't mean he doesn't get any. Among the booktubers out there that read Victorian novels, most of them give high marks to Anthony Trollope and look forward to reading Anthony Trollope. But among the vast majority of people, even a lot of readers, I know if I say to someone, hey, I like to read, and they say, hey, I like to read too. Well, what do you like to read? And I say, oh, I like this and this. I also like Victorian books. They'd be like, oh yeah, I like Dickens or whatever. And if I mention Anthony Trollope, not everyone will respond with, oh yeah, I know, I've read this and that, or I've heard he's good. Sometimes I'll actually get crickets. And I don't understand that. I don't understand how he doesn't get the recognition that I believe he should. And yet I feel like a hypocrite because I still haven't read enough of his novels, and I almost can't prove anything because I have not run across any of his novels that were not really good. So, and I'm sure there must be. There must be. It's almost a mission of mine to find a really bad Trollope book. And I know my sister, who's actually read more Trollopes than I have, and we're talking again, when I say Trollope today, I'm just talking about Anthony, not his mother, who wrote novels as well, who so far I've liked. So we're just talking about Anthony today. No offense to his mom. But someone's whistling outside. Let's hope the whistling's over. Anyway, I can't remember which book it is, but there's one book that I remember my sister read of his, and she was not entirely enthralled. So I forgot which one it is, but I'll probably come upon it. Oh, I can't remember now. But anyway, however, one of the things that I can say to his credit, and it's a silly thing that I use, but to me, it works. I mean, as you could probably tell from the I was going to say the book hoards that I do. Well, that's kind of close, but the hauls that I do. and that I own way too many books. And I will be doing another haul soon because I went to London and brought back quite a few books. Didn't buy any Trollope that time, but I did read him while I was away. But anyway, that I don't just buy an entire collection of a writer's works based on hearsay. Oh, Catherine, you'll like this person. Usually I'll have to have read a book or two of theirs to get to that point. And even then, I'm not going to buy their full body of work unread just because. I will, however, be motivated to collect a little bit if I can find reasonably priced things. And in his case, in Anthony Trollope's case, that has been the case. And not just him. Dickens, I found quite a few, and other writers too. But I have enjoyed the accumulation of Anthony Trollope's books since I started reading him. Again, I can't remember what year it is. I feel like it's got to be 2008. Not sure. Again, he came into my life a bit later. I had heard of his, I think, great niece or somebody, Joanna Trollope, because she was mentioned in Victorian magazine numerous times. But he came later for me. It's like his name sounded vaguely familiar. Again, this is something that happens to a lot of readers. Vaguely familiar. But as soon as I started reading his books, and I think the first one I finished was The Warden, which isn't even his best book, although I liked it. And some people are told when they read the Barsetshire series, the Barchester Towers, all those books, that maybe some are recommended not to start with The Warden because they say, oh, well, it's not as good. Maybe you won't get into it. And I'm sure some people that would be the case. But I kind of think power through it. I think it's a good book and then go completely through the series. But that's my opinion. Everybody's different. But anyway, from the get-go, I not only liked that book, but I knew that I wanted more Anthony Trollope in my life. And I had access to library book sales and other book sales. Buying a book of Anthony Trollope's, I think I even got one in Book Off earlier than a lot of other books. Although I also did that for Gaskell. But even library book sales from the past when they were still in existence near my office, and now they're not, but I still go to them when I can. I'd find books of his for like $1, $2, even 75 cents. And sometimes I would be getting them completely out of order. This particular book that I'm currently reading, but also, have had for a long time. Let's see, does it have the price in here? Yes, this was 75 cents, which means I got it at one of those library sales 100 years ago. I got it well before I got other of the books that are in that series. For example, Dr. Thorne I got a little bit later, and The Small House Allington I got later, and Family Parsonage, that's the other one. So all those not little, but the ones in the middle I got before the last one. Why? Because I found it, and I thought, I will read this book by Anthony Trollope. That was what it was. It was, when I buy books, I almost never buy them to collect, although there have been some volumes I did get just to collect, and that is a small minority of books. Most books that I buy, my full intention is to read them. So I knew when I would come across a book of his for, like I said, 75 cents, $1, $2, $3, I knew it was coming. I knew that I wanted to read these books. So this to me is a testament to the fact that I knew that he was going to be a favorite of mine, even if it took me a while to get him to be someone I read regularly. And then I started, I had a little bit of a hiatus, but I had a bit of a hiatus for a number of years where I wasn't reading that much in the realm of Victorian literature. I'd read so much in my, I guess, mid-20s to my early to mid-30s, and then suddenly I left off for a number of years where I read a few. I'm not saying I didn't read any, but I read fewer. And then I started back up like in full force when I got into BookTube and joined in October. And then who did I start off with? Anthony Trollope. And since then, I've almost always had one of his books going. So that's why I say Yes, there was a hiatus, but there was a hiatus for a lot of books. There were years in between my reading Jane Austen books. And again, favorite novelist of all time? Still. So that doesn't always mean that I don't like someone. Sometimes it's just I'm reading a lot of books. And I read nonfiction and I read fiction. Yes, and I read fiction of different genres. But he has stayed up there close to my heart for all this time. And I never went across his books when I was going through my library looking for things to cull. I never looked at them and said, you know who I should get rid of? Yes, Anthony Trollope. No, never, because I couldn't imagine. I always knew I'd come back to him, and I always do. He is someone I will always return to. And I have never read anything of his yet that I said, oh, I'm so disgusted by this. How could he have written that ending? Or how could he have done that to this character? There are things I don't like about certain characters, but I still love him. That's just the way he is. And so I've accumulated quite a few books over the years. I think close to 30, which is crazy because like I said, I have my work cut out for me, but it's completely worth it for me. Meanwhile, though, another thing happens while I'm reading his books. I pick up a book of his. Sometimes I just tear right through it within a couple of weeks, and sometimes I just keep it going for months. I will start it in the spring, and by the autumn, I'm done with it. And many people would say, well, if he was that good, wouldn't you have trouble putting him down? You might say that's a good argument, and it is for a lot of things. I would say for a mystery novel, that would be true, like a genuine mystery or suspense book. Those books are meant to be, no, you are going to stay up all night reading this thing or else, because you can't wait to know what happens. In his case, this doesn't mean I don't want to know what happens to characters, but the way he writes, a lot of times you can start a book and just live with them. Read a chapter or two here and there. Go back and read another chapter a couple weeks later. And then maybe at one point you hit a stride where you suddenly just read the last 100 pages really fast, and that's it. At least that's how I read him. And that's basically how I finished his last book. No, I say his last book, the last book of his that I read, and that was Three Clerks. I say Three Clerks. I know it's probably Three Clarks in England. Actually, I know it is. It was confirmed to me recently. But what can I say? I started this in August, and it was kind of a buddy read with my sister, and she reads Trollope just faster than I do. But I visited her in August, and we were both reading it together. She was always a little bit ahead of me. And then September came, and I was still reading it, but she finished it quicker than I did. And I decided I'd bring it with me to London, and it will be the main book, actually the only physical book that I was going to bring with me. And I had a couple of things that I could read on my phone if I needed to. And then, of course, I bought more books, but I didn't really read them while I was there. Again, the haul is coming. But I enjoyed having this. I just didn't have a lot of reading time when I was there. I was with my friend. We were spending a lot of time together. Usually at night when I would be reading, I was tired. So, but I did end up reading it along, throughout my trip on the plane. It was thoroughly enjoyable, but I didn't finish it until a week or so after I got home. So yeah, even then it wasn't like unputdownable, but then toward the ending, like I said, probably the last 100 pages, I did start speeding through. Not because I wanted to get over with, but because the plot just really started to pick up in ways that I really needed to know what happened next. Now, was this his best book? Probably not. A lot about it was good, but slightly repetitive of other plots that I read of his, slightly. But it was definitely not a bad book, and it was enjoyable. It was I would say a read that I would recommend to most readers, especially people who enjoy the pacing of Victorian novels. But I have no shame in taking my time with that. I feel like it was enjoyable to live with some of the characters in this book. And that's also how I feel again about this book, which is I consider currently reading, and I started it months ago, and now I want to get back to it because I really do want to know what happens in this book. And I really just want to have finished the series because that's kind of cool. But so I'm a ways through it. I remember the reason I put this one down is because they had to introduce some new characters, and even though this book is really good, these particular characters I'm not really invested in. So there was a bit of a block there for me, which surprised me because I know I really like this book. But doesn't to me that doesn't that's not like a flaw of his. It's just that personally I was not in the mood for new characters and I was reading other books. So that's what happened to that book. But I can't wait to get back to it, really. Um so then why would I say that he's my favorite Victorian novelist, despite the fact that I take my own sweet time? I still say the argument that I take my time is that I'm just savoring it. So I hope that's a good enough argument. But and the fact that there was a hiatus, the fact that there's a lot of other reasons, even though I've tried to justify it, I just really like Anthony Trollope. He's almost a fourth wall breaker. Not that his characters do so, but he, as a writer, as the author, likes to address the reader a lot in ways that some other writers do, but he does it a lot more, like little asides saying, don't worry, this isn't going to happen, or don't worry, these people are not going to get married, or don't worry, this person looks like they have this disease, but they actually don't, or I really want to punish this character, I don't like him, but I'm not, he that won't be justified or something. And I like that. It makes me feel like I'm taking a little journey with him as he's writing these stories. And I actually liked this one in particular because one of the main characters in here is also writing books, partially for a living, and I think it's semi autobiographical. So I like that. I also admire the little bit I've read about Anthony Trollope. I'm sure he was not a perfect person, but I know he was hardworking. He was so prolific. He spent so much time reading. Writing. Like, probably read a lot too, because the way he writes refers to books. He definitely read a lot, but he had jobs. He was busy in a lot of ways, but he was industrious in his writing, and especially considering the fact that they didn't have laptops that you could just type really fast on. No, they were writing with pens that you gotta dip in and write with, which is, to me, laborious. And the fact that he was doing this for years, like any prolific novelist of that time period, I just give him a lot of credit for that, and also coming up with interesting stories. And a lot of his stories have somewhat similarities. Like, there are usually clergymen. Remember in the Three Clerks, I don't think it was, but there's usually in a lot of his books some form of clergymen. There's some form of politicians, someone standing for parliament at some point. There's usually some kind of inheritance that comes in there. There's some lawyers. There's always characters with funny names. Like Dickens has funny names too, but for some reason I think Anthony Trollope's names make me laugh out loud a lot more. There's humor, there's sadness, but so far most of the stories I have come across of his aren't usually like gut-wrenchingly sad. Even if there's a death, it's usually not horrifically sad. So that helps, because sometimes there's just so much I can handle. Um, but yeah, so there's happiness, there's sadness, there's people getting what they deserve, and some people getting away with things that they shouldn't. But most of the time, there's some kind of justice in his stories that I think is pretty great, because you do need to see that a little bit. And if there's not perfect justice for a character, there's usually an explanation of why there isn't. So you feel, all right, okay, that makes sense. There's fox hunting, which I'm not that big on, honestly, but there's sometimes slightly Jane Austen type of situations, like I said, with inheritances and marriages and everything, and just people going to visiting each other's homes and talking and having tea and everything. And there's dancing. This particular book does have a dance in the story that's kind of important to the plot, at least for some of the characters, and actually for a good number of the characters. But anyway, so I think he has it all. Humor, a little bit of pathos occasionally, but not too much. And I think he's just a great storyteller. So I think I've said enough good things about him. I'm sure I'm forgetting some things, and I'm going to be kicking myself later and saying, why didn't I say this about him? But I can't say it all, because I want, if you haven't read Trollope, or if you haven't read Trollope in a while, maybe you've read the wrong one. There are, like I said, over 40 of his books out there. If you read maybe the series that doesn't appeal to you, or the one standalone that didn't work for you, try another one. Try some of the big ones. I liked The Way We Live Now. It was a pretty big chunky one, but it feels modern, and yet it has a lot of the Victorian bits about it as well. There's some sad things that happen, but most of it makes sense. But anyway, so I've said enough about Anthony Trollope and my own personal relationship with him. I'm going to continue to read him as well as many other writers, but I think I will continue to call him my favorite, and I hope you guys can give him a chance and maybe make him one of your favorites as well. Anyway, I will talk about him again in future times. After completing more of his books, I may have further discussions about him. But I don't want to pretend to be an expert on him, even if he is one of my favorites, because there's people who know a lot more than I do. Just thought I'd have this little chat during October, and I hope you've enjoyed. Please let me know in the comments below if you've read Trollope yourself and what your relationship with Mr. Anthony Trollope is. If it's a good one or a bad one, if you've had, personal favorites or ones that really disappointed you, I'd like to know. So that's all for now. This is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day, especially Trollope.